15 middleweight square off on the prelims. We have Kelvin Gastelum looking to pick up his first win since UFC 258, taking on Extreme Couture's the action man Chris Curtis. 4-1 in the 5-on-in for Chris Curtis. But for Kelvin Gastelum, you got to start off at the start off. He came in off the Ultimate Fighter. He wins the season. He's the boy wonder. But then you look at the recent string of success, and again, for Gastelum, he's 1-4 in the 5-on-in. He was supposed to take on Nasruddin Imavov back in January, wasn't able to make the walk, had the facial injury, lost a tooth, got it fixed, had the big sore on his face. I don't know if that was staph infection.
Wash your face, guys.
He did have staph infection getting ready for UFC 234 against Robert Whittaker, but Whittaker pulled out due to a hernia, so the fight got canceled. But Gastelum struggled with that in the past. But if you look at it, January 25th, not long after, Gastelum tweeted it out, and he announced this fight between him and Chris Curtis. So Curtis last time out knocked off a foe. You want to talk a foe? There was like Taylor Swift. There was like Ryan Adams covering Taylor Swift bad blood. So for Chris Curtis, he goes out there. He's tentative in the first round. He's tentative in the second round until he goes out there and picks up that knockout. For Chris Curtis, in a fight like this against Kelvin Gastelum, Gastelum's going to bring the pressure. And that's where Curtis shines. Because Curtis, will he walk you down? Not in every fight. But will he counter-strike and throw some power and mix it into some of those boxing combinations? You know that he will. And Chris Curtis, from his stance, we talk about this. Could you pick the silhouette with the fighter? Chris Curtis.
High shoulders?
High shoulder, looks like a boxer, walk guys down in MMA. So, Matt, when you look at the matchup like this, for Gastelum, it's easy to say, if he fought like he did in his last win against Ian Heinisch, goes out there and puts on the wrestling shoes. If he fought like he did
against Darren Till, I think he'd have a good chance.
Yeah, I mean, for Gastelum against a guy like Curtis, what has Curtis struggled with throughout his career? Wrestling. And lack of volume, but wrestling.
I even think the pressure, though, of a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, because I agree with you, Chris Curtis is a phenomenal counter-striker. He has great hooks on the inside, which
he watches the channel, so you gotta mind your P's and Q's?
No, I think Chris Curtis has a ton of strengths to his game, but the weird thing is, I really think Chris Curtis is going to need either A, knockdowns to win this fight to kind of make up for the difference in output, or finish a guy like Kelvin Gastelum. I was kind of making the joke to you before we started filming. My buddy Tim, who's got probably too many shoutouts on this channel, every time Kelvin Gastelum seems to fight, I'm like, this might be the one where his chin does get tested, you know? He seems to get wobbled in every single fight, but he never really goes down. I'm kind of at the point now where I have no idea what's going to knock out Kelvin Gastelum, to be honest. Like, we've seen Israel Adesanya land 360 elbows into, like, left hooks, and he goes down, but he's still pretty conscious, and that's the wild thing. I think for Chris Curtis, does he have all the skills to win this fight? Of course he does, but I thought Robert Whittaker was going to finish Kelvin Gastelum. He wasn't able to do it. I thought Darren Till could finish Kelvin Gastelum. He wasn't able to do it. Just every time I feel like I want to completely sell my stock on Kelvin Gastelum, he looks a little bit better in a loss than I kind of expected him to, and that's why I have a hard time with this fight, because for Chris Curtis, we know that when he fights the sort of top tier guys, maybe he doesn't have enough. We saw that in the Jack Hermanson fight. Hermanson won with the output, which is kind of weird, because Hermanson's definitely known for being more of a grappler, even though he does have good output. I'm not saying that to discredit his striking, but for Chris Curtis, you don't see him getting outstruck by Jack Hermanson and then think, okay, he's going to beat Robert Whittaker after that. But I think this matchup against Kelvin Gastelum is going to leave the door open for him to land a lot of those counter shots, because Gastelum is going to have to move forward in this fight, and I don't know if he's really been able to say that in his last number of fights, because everybody else has brought the fight to him.
The Gastelum fight that I go back to when I look at a fight against Chris Curtis, okay, let's think of southpaws that he's fought. You have the one against Darren Till, you have Vitor Belfort, Johnny Hendricks, and Rick Story. So out of those, Gastelum's 3-1.
Cannonier switches, though.
I go back against old. I said Till, Vitor, Hendricks.
I know. I was just saying, like, Cannonier had a lot of success in the southpaw with the leg kick, and that's
Cannonier will switch, and so will Israel Adesanya. But when you go back and you look at Kelvin's fight against Vitor Belfort, I just got to take a second for just 1 second. Just a second. Vitor was 39. Last night, Vitor was 46 years old and beat Jacare Souza. Matt, I'm going to say a sentence that's factual. Remember the time the guy in the Wheaties box beat a 56-year-old Roy Jones Jr.?
Can't be touched, can't be stopped, can't be moved, can't be rocked.
Like, that really happened.
Hot, Craig.
That really happened. But if you look at it for Kelvin Gastelum in the fight that he had against Vitor Belfort, who was... His head was shit. He didn't look like the same.
But that wasn't Vitor.
He did have Shogun Hua trunks, and boy, were they teensy-weensy. But if you look at Gastelum in that fight, in the first round, he throws a right hook and a left straight.
Was he puffing, though, Craig?
Yeah, that was
the trouble.
Puffing. So he gets the first knockdown, right hook, left straight.
It's beautiful.
Vitor gets back up, and he's bloodied, and then Gastelum throws, like, To me, it looked like a 60% 1-2, and it drops Vitor, and that's the end of the fight. There's
He did a great job moving his feet, though, close in the distance, is what I will say.
There's a delayed reaction, but now there's a big but. That's a no contest on Kelvin Gastelum's record. Again, I consider it a win. If NBA players in 2023 can rip the reefer, then Kelvin Gastelum picked up a win in that fight against Vitor Belfort.
I'm Canadian in 2023. If you think I care that an MMA fighter smoked weed before a fight, you're out of your mind. But what I will say is, this is a bit of an interesting reset for a guy like Gastelum, because Chris Curtis, we talked about this with like Dustin Jacoby for a while. He is sort of that like 16th ranked fighter. So
the guy's 9-1 in his last 10 fights.
That's my point. For Gastelum, even if he loses this, it's not saying Gastelum has nothing left. You know what I mean? But it is fair to say that if you lose to Chris Curtis, it's no longer you losing to Jared Cannonier or Robert Whittaker or Darren Till. It will be a bit of a step back. So for Gastelum, this is a really important fight in his career. And I know he hasn't had a lot of inconsequential fights, but this is a very important one.
For Curtis, he did get that performance bonus his last time out. And you talk Southpaw versus Southpaw. Curtis fought Southpaws in the past, and he's fought good grapplers. Hermanson went 0-6 on takedown attempts in their fight. Brendan Allen really tried to sync things up with that early submission attempt. Curtis able to shuck him off and then go out there and put him down to the canvas. But if you look at it for Gastelum, the interesting thing is, since he joined the UFC, 6 main events and 8 co-main events. 7 5-round fights, because his fight against Adesanya was a co-main event for the title. And out of all of those fights, all of the 5-round fights, Cannonier is a loss, Whittaker's a loss, Adesanya's a loss, Bisping is a win, Weidman's a loss.
Bisping also just fought GSP.
Vitor is a win to me. And then in his fight against Neil Magny, that's a loss. But if you look at it, he struggled in 5-round fights. But in 3-round fights, Gastelum looks pretty darn fresh in these fights.
I don't know the answer to this, but it is an interesting question. And I should send a fighter who follows me on Instagram a DM, so I'm going to do that after this. But do you think fighting in a lot of 5-round atmospheres can kind of mess with your pacing over time? I've never really thought of that until right now, if I'm being completely honest with you. I am concerned that if Gastelum is too used to kind of a 25-minute atmosphere, that kind of getting back into a 15-minute fight is a little bit interesting. That's all. It's an interesting point that I've never really thought about.
This guy's not a one-pump chump. He can go 25 rounds. When you look at it for Gastelum, though, has switched things up recently. If you did look at it, I mean, getting ready for the fight against Imavov, he's been at fight ready for quite some time with Eddie Cha and Santino DeFranco, so eager to see how that plays out in a matchup against Chris Curtis, who has some similarities to Nasruddin Imavov. They're big, they're tall, they strike at range. But when you do look at the odds, Matt, Gastelum ever so slightly favored. We have a look at the Topology vote. Surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to say over under 65% Gastelum.
I think it'll be over.
It's under. 1,780 total votes. 73% of the underdog Curtis, 64% by decision, 28% by knockout. For the 27% that have Gastelum, 83% by decision. This is where it gets really weird, Matt, because Chris Curtis corners a lot of fighters at Extreme Couture.
We love that.
We love that. Now, who did he corner? Sean Strickland, who replaced Kelvin Gastelum against Nasruddin Imavov. Who picked Nasruddin Imavov? Not this guy, but that doesn't matter. I had Gastelum to beat Imavov, and then I had Strickland to beat Imavov. I feel like I've got a good read on a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, even though the 1 and the 4 and the 5 on in, and Chris Curtis is the inverse.
Yeah.
When you look at this matchup, though, Matt, Gastelum's wrestling X factor that we only see sometimes.
I don't think we will.
Fight.
I just don't.
And if he boxes, he's really tricky when he gets into the pocket and he decides to mix in the lead uppercut and then his left hook. I'm eager to see what kind of volume numbers we get out of Curtis. And if Curtis decides that he's willing to accept the backup, because again, out of that one loss that he has in the 5 on into Jack Hermanson, you consider the fight against Vieira, he was able to kind of work the pressure at the start, and then as it went on, it wasn't necessarily the
Can
most
Adolfo
appeasing
box like
fight.
Kelvin Gastelum?
No,
exactly.
But Curtis was able to kind of pull away with the volume on the outside. I don't know what version of Gastelum you're going to get in this one myself.
You want to feel like a dummy? Pick Kelvin Gastelum in the year 2023, and that's what I'm going to do right now. I like his output, and I like his chin. Again, I've never seen Kelvin Gastelum get knocked out, which does mean something to me. I've seen him fight some devastating punchers in the past, and I do think Chris Curtis is a devastating puncher, so I will give him that credit. I think those opportunities to land the big shot will be there, but ever so slightly, I'm going to pick Kelvin Gastelum, and I don't feel great about it.
Including the Josh Saman win on The Ultimate Fighter, and then, of course, the fight against Uriah Hall. Kelvin Gastelum is 11-3 in 3-round fights in the Zuffa banner. And again, he's 1-5 with a no contest in 5-round fights. So for Gastelum, the big reset. For Chris Curtis, we'll see if that power punching works out. I love Chris Curtis in this matchup against Kelvin Gastelum with the counter striking, but I like Kelvin Gastelum's pressure and his wrestling a little bit more. So both of us going with, yikes, Kelvin Gastelum in this fight. Let us know, please, and I know you will, down below in that comment section. If you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, rate and review the show. Matt, now we kick it into high gear over on the main card. Raul Rosas Jr. taking on Christian Rodriguez. Can't wait for it. Keep it locked in with Fighting Apex. We always say, let's get into it.